Welcome, the anointed ones. Step into the light, because the shadows were never built to hold you. Chosen one, think about this. Psychologists say that most people, when embarrassed or falsely accused, retreat into hiding for years, sometimes even for life. That's the instinct. Disappear, keep quiet, lick your wounds, hope the world forgets. But you broke that rule. You did the unthinkable. You didn't vanish, you didn't crawl under the rug, you didn't wear the invisible cloak of silence. Instead, you showed up, boldly, unapologetically, and without shame. And here's the twist that makes everyone's jaw drop. Your presence isn't just survival, it's confrontation without a word. Every time you walk into a room, scroll past their feed, or simply exist in plain sight, you're exposing a truth they've been desperately trying to bury. That's why people are shocked. It's not that you survived, it's that you refuse to hide your survival. See, your very visibility is rebellion. It unsettles them, because it cancels their entire storyline about you. And let's be real, the irony is hilarious. They threw dirt on your name, hoping you'd vanish, but now you're walking around like a living billboard that says, still here, still standing, and still not hiding. If survival was supposed to make you smaller, you've somehow grown larger, brighter, and more unshakable. So buckle up. Because today we're diving deep into why your refusal to hide has left people utterly confused, secretly intimidated, and publicly speechless. This isn't just about showing your face, it's about what your face represents. Number one, they expected you to crawl back into the shadows, but you're living in broad daylight. They expected you to crawl back into the shadows, but you're living in broad daylight. That's the shock that no one is talking about out loud, yet everyone feels. People counted on your silence. They bet on your disappearance. They thought the shame they tried to smear on you would be too heavy for you to carry in public. They believed the lies they spread about you would make you too embarrassed to ever show your face again. And yet, here you are. Not only visible, but thriving in the very space they tried to exile you from. The reason it rattles them so deeply is because they can't understand how you managed to bypass the emotional prison they set up for you. Most people, when hit with betrayal, humiliation, or attacks on their character, shrink back. They hide to escape the ridicule. They hide to recover in silence. They hide to avoid the stares. That's the expected pattern. And the crowd was waiting for you to follow it, but instead you did the opposite. You came out stronger, bolder, and without apology. That reversal is what makes their heads spin. Every time you walk around unashamed, it throws them into conflict with their own conscience. Because if the roles were reversed, they would have folded. They would have disappeared. They would have stayed underground hoping people forgot. The fact that you didn't proves that their calculations about you were all wrong. They saw you as fragile, but your decision to stay visible proves that you're built from something they don't understand. The most unsettling part for them is that your visibility makes them powerless. When they can't erase you, they're forced to live with you as a constant reminder that their attempts to bury you failed. You become evidence of their failure every time you show up. And there's no way for them to silence that proof. Your very existence in broad daylight dismantles the narratives they carefully crafted. So the shock isn't just about you being seen. It's about what your presence says without saying a word. You weren't destroyed, you weren't silenced, and you weren't shamed into hiding. You're proof that they underestimated you, and that's the kind of proof they can't run from. Number two, your survival isn't quiet, it's loud without words. Your survival isn't quiet, it's loud without words. That's what unsettles people the most. They thought survival meant crawling out of the fire, weak, scarred, and whispering about what you've been through. But the way you carry yourself, the way you move, the way you show up, it speaks volumes without you having to explain anything. People can feel it in your presence. They sense that you've been through things that should have crushed you. Yet somehow you're standing firm, breathing easy, and even smiling. That silent strength is louder than any speech you could give. What really disturbs them is that you don't need to defend yourself. You don't need to shout about your innocence, beg for sympathy, or prove your worth. You've let your survival do all the talking. And the truth is, survival that comes with peace hits harder than survival that comes with bitterness. It's one thing to make it through a storm and spend the rest of your life limping, complaining, or replaying the pain. It's another thing entirely to walk through a storm and come out with a calm that looks almost supernatural. That calm is what they can't explain. Your silence isn't weakness, it's authority. Because every time you show up alive, every time you live your life without hiding, every time you succeed without broadcasting it, you're declaring something bigger than words. You're saying, what was meant to break me didn't, and people can't argue with the evidence right in front of them. They may not like it, but they can't deny it. The loudness of your survival also exposes the smallness of their attacks. All the gossip, the sabotage, the slander, the betrayal, it was meant to mute you. But now those same weapons look useless because you're still here. Without ever pointing fingers or calling names, you've revealed how powerless their schemes actually were. That's why your survival feels so loud. It echoes in their conscience, reminding them that they couldn't silence you, no matter how hard they tried. So while others look for ways to prove themselves with noise and explanations, you've proven yourself with presence. Your survival has become its own broadcast, and the message is unmistakable. You're not just alive, you're untouchable in ways words could never capture. Number 3. They're shocked because they projected their own weakness onto you. They're shocked because they projected their own weakness onto you. That's the heart of it. From the beginning, they believed you'd fold under pressure because that's exactly what they would have done. They assumed that if they were in your shoes, facing betrayal, ridicule, or being targeted, they'd break down, withdraw, and hide away. So when they saw you rise instead of retreat, it rattled them to the core. You didn't just defy their expectations. You exposed how fragile they actually are. People often judge others based on their own limits. If they can't imagine surviving something, they automatically believe no one else can either. That's why they thought you were finished the moment life got heavy. In their minds, no one could possibly endure what you did without collapsing. But you didn't just endure. You stood tall. And that made them confront a reality they never wanted to face. The weakness they saw in you was actually a reflection of themselves. This is why their shock runs so deep. You broke the mirror they tried to hold up to you. They wanted you to validate their belief that hardship destroys people permanently. Instead, your resilience proved the opposite, that hardship can reveal a strength they don't have. Your very survival challenges the excuses they've lived by. They can't lean on the idea that no one could have made it through that anymore, because you did. What unsettles them even more is that your strength wasn't borrowed. You didn't cling to a crowd. You didn't hide behind noise. You didn't beg for validation. You carried yourself through. That kind of independence makes their own dependence on appearances and approval painfully obvious. Suddenly they see that their lives have been built on shaky ground, while yours is rooted in something unshakable. So their shock isn't just about you not breaking down. It's about the way your survival exposes their limits. It's uncomfortable for them to realize that what they thought was impossible, you made possible. That kind of contradiction forces them to look at themselves differently, and many don't like what they see. Your resilience doesn't just shine light on your strength. It reveals the weakness they tried to project onto you all along. Number 4, your presence cancels their narrative. Your presence cancels their narrative. That's why your existence unsettles them more than anything you could ever say. They invested time, energy, and even reputation into building a story about you. A story that painted you as broken, unstable, and finished. They told others you were done. They whispered that you couldn't recover. They convinced themselves that their version of you was the truth. But every time you walk into a room, every time you show up in life unbothered and still standing, the entire script they wrote crumbles in front of them. The power of their narrative depended on your absence. As long as you stayed quiet or hidden, people had nothing else to go on but what they were told. Your silence left room for their lies to sound believable. But the moment you step out and live your life visibly, their story collapses under the weight of reality. You don't even have to explain yourself. Just being present, whole, calm, and moving forward makes everything they said look like fiction. This is the part that frustrates them the most. They can't erase you. They can't rewrite the truth of who you are when you're standing right there, alive and undeniable. Their words are fragile compared to your presence. That contradiction is too loud to ignore. They may keep trying to repeat their version, but each time you show up, it cancels the noise. What makes this even more powerful is that you're not performing. You're not trying to prove them wrong. You're simply living, and that alone is enough. That effortless strength exposes how desperate they were to make people believe a false story. It shows that their narrative wasn't built on facts. It was built on hopes that you'd disappear. Your presence also forces people to make a choice. Believe the gossip or believe their eyes. And more often than not, eyes win. They can see you're not broken. They can see you're not finished. They can see you're standing strong. That visible truth cancels out every whispered lie. So the very thing they counted on, your absence, has become their downfall. Because as long as you're present, their story about you has no power. Your existence rewrites the script without you ever lifting a pen. Number 5. They're stunned because you refused the role they wrote for you. They're stunned because you refused the role they wrote for you. People had already decided who you were supposed to be. In their minds, you were the silent victim who would disappear quietly, the cautionary tale others could point to as an example of what happens when life gets rough, or the ghost of failure that would linger only in memory. They rehearsed that script so well that they were convinced it would play out exactly as they imagined. But you didn't perform their version. You didn't give them the satisfaction of watching you crumble into invisibility. Instead, you broke character, walked off their stage, and started writing your own story. That's what unsettles them, the refusal to cooperate. People are comfortable when they can predict your role, when they can define you, when they can use your pain as a backdrop for their own narrative. They don't know what to do when you won't play along. Your choice to step into visibility, to live boldly, and to refuse silence ripped the mask off their illusions. It proved that their control over your story was only ever an illusion. What makes this even more powerful is that you didn't replace their script with another performance. You didn't show up trying to prove something or trying to impress anyone. You showed up authentically, and authenticity is the one thing their false script can't survive. It exposes every exaggeration, every lie, every attempt to define you through their limited imagination. The truth is, people get invested in seeing others play small because it validates their own limitations. By stepping out of the role they wrote for you, you showed them a mirror they didn't want to face. You revealed that their definitions were never big enough to contain you. That kind of refusal is both threatening and liberating at the same time. Threatening to them because it breaks their control. Liberating to you because it sets you free from every false identity they tried to trap you in. So the shock isn't just that you survived. It's that you rejected their storyline altogether. You weren't supposed to be visible, unbroken, or moving forward. Yet here you are, unashamed, rewriting the script with your life. And that unscripted strength makes every illusion they created collapse under its own weakness. Number 6. You're not hiding because you have nothing to fear. You're not hiding because you have nothing to fear. That's the part they never prepared themselves for. They assumed you would go silent, not because you were guilty, but because they hoped you'd carry the weight of false guilt, the sting of shame, and the burden of fear. They thought you would be trapped in the same cages they've lived in their whole lives. But what they failed to understand is that you were never the one who needed to hide. When your heart is clean, when your motives are pure, and when your truth can stand on its own, you don't need shadows to protect you. Daylight is enough. This is why your presence is so unsettling. Most people are experts at hiding. They hide behind masks, lies, and curated images, terrified that the real story will leak out. They live as fugitives of their own conscience. So when they see you walking freely, unburdened, and without apology, it confuses them. How are you not afraid? How do you stand boldly when their entire identity depends on hiding? The answer is simple. You have no secrets to cover and no skeletons to guard. Your freedom isn't arrogance, it's clarity. Innocence carries its own authority. You don't have to explain yourself endlessly because truth needs no defense. You don't have to run from whispers Because you know whispers can't undo what's real, and you don't have to disappear, because the only people who hide are those who carry shadows inside them. That's the difference. They hide because they're guilty, while you stay visible because you're free. The fact that you refuse to shrink back makes people nervous. It highlights the dishonesty in their own lives. Every time you stand in the open, you expose how much of their existence depends on performance and concealment. It's not just your courage they're reacting to. It's their own lack of it. You've revealed that the only power guilt and shame ever had was the power someone gives them. And since you never bowed to it, you've left them powerless to control you. So your refusal to hide isn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's a statement. It's proof that the truth doesn't run, it doesn't cover itself, and it doesn't shrink. You're not hiding because you never needed to. And that freedom is what terrifies them most. Number 7. Every time you appear, it exposes their cowardice. Every time you appear, it exposes their cowardice. That's the sting they can't escape. The very people who once worked so hard to silence you are now the ones shrinking back into their own shadows. They hoped their schemes, lies, and attempts at sabotage would be enough to erase you. But instead, you're still here, visible, present, and unashamed. Your presence holds up a mirror they don't want to look into, because it forces them to confront the truth of what they did and the weakness behind why they did it. Cowardice has a pattern. It attacks in the dark, but it hides when light shows up. That's exactly what's happening here. They were bold when they thought you were defenseless, when they believed you'd never recover, when they assumed you'd disappear quietly. But the moment you refused to vanish, the moment you stepped back into visibility, their so-called boldness evaporated. Suddenly, they can't maintain eye contact. Suddenly, they're uncomfortable in your presence. Suddenly, the ones who tried to break you are the ones avoiding being seen. What makes this even more powerful is that you don't have to call them out. You don't have to expose their names or recount their deeds. Your very survival does it for you. Your life itself testifies that they failed. Every success you achieve, every step you take forward, every time you show up alive and strong, it all broadcasts that their darkness wasn't enough to overcome you. That silent declaration strips away their fake bravado and leaves their cowardice bare for everyone to see. And here's the part that unsettles them most. You're not carrying bitterness. You're not walking around bitter or trying to prove a point. You're simply existing, moving forward, and living your truth. That effortless presence is far more damning than any accusation you could make, because while you're standing in plain sight, they're ducking and dodging, weighed down by the choices they made. So each time you appear, it's not just a reminder that you survived. It's living proof that they didn't have the courage to face life the way you did. They had to scheme in the shadows, but you stood in the open. And that contrast reveals the truth. Strength endures while cowardice hides. Number 8. They're shocked because you wear what they couldn't survive. They're shocked because you wear what they couldn't survive. That's the truth that unsettles people every time they see you. Life threw battles at you that were designed to strip you bare, to bury you, and to make sure you never stood tall again. But instead of covering the scars or pretending those battles didn't happen, you've made them part of your identity. You wear them openly, not as wounds, but as proof. Proof that you walked through fire, proof that you endured storms, and proof that nothing could break you completely. The unsettling part for others is the quiet reminder that they would never have made it if the same weight had been placed on them. Deep down, they know it. They know that what you've carried would have folded them in half. They know the betrayals, the heartbreaks, the losses, and the pressure would have destroyed them. But instead of destroying you, it refined you. And now your very existence reminds them of the strength they lack. Scars make most people uncomfortable. They don't want to see them, let alone wear them with dignity. But you've done something different. You've transformed scars into symbols of survival. That alone is disarming. It's easy for people to gossip when they think you're broken. It's easy for them to whisper when they assume you're ashamed. But when you step out, fully visible, wearing what was supposed to end you, their words collapse. They don't know how to process strength that doesn't hide pain but integrates it. Your scars have become your armor. They're no longer signs of weakness but evidence of resilience. And every time people see you thriving with those scars in plain sight, they're forced to reckon with their own fragility. It's not just jealousy, it's exposure. Your life exposes the limits of their endurance. That's why your presence is so powerful. You didn't pretend the pain didn't happen. You didn't bury your story. You let the battles shape you, and now you wear the outcome with a kind of fearlessness they can't relate to. They're shocked, not only because you survived, but because you wear survival so openly. And in wearing it, you've turned what should have been your burial into your badge of honor. Number 9. Visibility is dangerous to those who built power on your absence. Visibility is dangerous to those who built power on your absence. That's why your return to the forefront shakes them more than anything else you could have done. When you were out of sight, people had free rein to shape their version of who you were. They painted pictures of your downfall. They exaggerated your flaws. They twisted your story to fit their agenda. And because you weren't around to challenge it, those lies grew legs. Gossip sounded convincing. Manipulation had room to breathe. Your silence became the soil they planted their false power in. But the moment you stepped back into visibility, everything started to unravel. Your presence alone is like a hammer against the foundation they built. The narrative no longer fits because the person they described doesn't match the person standing in front of everyone now. The lies sound flimsy when people can see you for themselves. The gossip feels empty when your life proves the opposite. That's the danger. Your presence is dismantling their structure piece by piece. What makes this sting even more is that many of them gained influence while you were gone. They became the authorities on your story. They fed others a distorted version of you and built their own identity around it. But now, with you present, their authority dissolves. You've exposed that their power wasn't real. It was borrowed, built on your silence. And borrowed power never lasts when the rightful owner shows up. Your visibility is threatening not because you're loud, but because you're undeniable. You don't have to argue. You don't have to defend yourself. The contradiction between their words and your reality is obvious, and people can see it with their own eyes. That kind of exposure is dangerous for anyone who survives on manipulation, because once the truth is visible, deception loses its grip. So while you may see your presence as simply living your life, to them, it's destruction. You are dismantling their stage by standing on it. You're undoing their lies by existing. You're proving their version false just by being present. That's why they're uneasy, because when someone builds power on another person's absence, the worst thing that can happen to them is that the person shows up and refuses to disappear again. Number 10. You aren't hiding because you understand exposure differently. You aren't hiding because you understand exposure differently. For most people, exposure feels like a curse. It means vulnerability, embarrassment, or humiliation. They've been taught to keep secrets, to cover scars, to protect an image at all costs. To them, being seen in their raw, unpolished truth is the ultimate defeat. That's why they assumed you would go into hiding, because they measure survival by how well someone can conceal what they've been through. But you flipped that definition on its head. You decided that exposure isn't weakness at all. It's freedom. Instead of running from your story, you let it breathe. Instead of burying your scars, you let them show. Instead of disguising the weight of your battles, you carried them openly. And in doing so, you turned what others would call shame into transparency. That kind of reversal terrifies people because it strips away their greatest weapon, secrecy. They wanted to use your pain against you. They wanted your past to be a tool for control, but once you made peace with your truth and allowed it to be seen, it no longer had power over you, and it no longer had power for them to use. This is why they don't know how to handle you. You've exposed the flaw in their belief system. They thought survival meant covering up, staying silent, and curating appearances. You've shown that survival can mean the exact opposite, standing bare, unapologetic, and unashamed. By refusing to hide, you've revealed that real strength comes from transparency, not concealment. And here's the part that shakes them most. Transparency attracts trust. When you stand openly in your truth, people recognize it. They can see that you're not performing. They can feel that your presence isn't built on pretending. That authenticity has a magnetic pull, and it dismantles the shallow power of those who depend on appearances. So no, you aren't hiding because you understand exposure differently. It doesn't mean you've lost, it means you've already won. It doesn't mean you're broken, it means you're too real to be manipulated. And every time you show up with that kind of raw honesty, it terrifies the ones who've built their lives on pretense, because you prove that the very thing they fear, being seen, is the very thing that sets you free. Number 11. They're shocked because you're not pretending anymore. They're shocked because you're not pretending anymore. For so long, people got used to the version of you that worked hard to fit in, to keep the peace, to play the role everyone expected. That version wore masks, adjusted tones, and carried weight that wasn't even yours, just to make others feel comfortable. And because almost everyone around them still lives like that, performing, conforming, pretending, they assumed you would too. But you walked away from the stage, dropped the script, and decided that being raw, real, and unpolished was more powerful than performing perfection. That shift unsettles people because it leaves them exposed. Most people are still pretending. They're still curating an image, still hiding flaws, still putting on a show. When they look at you, they're forced to confront the truth that authenticity is possible, and that they've chosen not to embrace it. That's what makes them uncomfortable. Your honesty shines a light on their performance. It also shocks them because pretending is often confused with strength. Many believe that keeping it together, never showing weakness, always looking polished, is the definition of resilience. But you've proven otherwise. You've shown that real strength is dropping the act, admitting the truth, and living without fear of who sees it. That kind of authenticity is rare, and rare things always make people stare. What makes your decision even more powerful is that it wasn't about rebellion for rebellion's sake. You didn't stop pretending to shock people or to prove a point. You stopped pretending because you outgrew the performance. You reached a place where survival required honesty. And once you discovered that peace comes from authenticity, there was no reason to go back to masks. That quiet, grounded choice has made a louder impact than any dramatic statement could. So yes, they're shocked. Not because you're broken, but because you've healed in a way they didn't expect. You're no longer bending to fit their stage or playing the role they handed you. You're standing as yourself, unapologetic and whole. And that raw honesty cuts deeper than any performance because it exposes the truth. Most people are still pretending while you've chosen freedom. Number 12. They can't fathom that your courage isn't borrowed. They can't fathom that your courage isn't borrowed. For most people, courage is something they put on like a jacket, temporary, situational, and dependent on who's around to cheer them on. They draw it from crowds, from approval, from having backup. When the applause stops or the support fades, their courage disappears too. That's why they assumed yours would crumble the moment you stood alone. But what they don't understand is that your courage was forged differently. It wasn't borrowed, it was born. Born in isolation, born in fire, born in pain that stripped you down and rebuilt you from the inside out. That kind of courage unsettles them because it doesn't need permission. It doesn't wait for validation. It doesn't shrink when the crowd leaves. It's the type of courage that comes from being tested when no one was watching, from surviving nights when there was no one to call, from carrying battles in silence and coming out with a strength no one gave you. That's why it can't be taken back, because no one else supplied it in the first place. People are unnerved by that kind of independence. They can't wrap their minds around a strength that doesn't run out when support is withdrawn. They expect to see you crumble without the safety net they themselves rely on. Instead, they see you stand taller in the very moments that would have destroyed them, and that contradiction forces them to admit a truth they don't want to face. Your courage comes from a place deeper than circumstance. It also exposes the weakness of their own courage. Because when courage is borrowed, it's fragile. It depends on everything going right, on people clapping, on things working in their favor. Your courage, on the other hand, grew out of moments when everything went wrong. and that makes it unshakable. That comparison stings because it highlights the gap between what they've been leaning on and what you've built within yourself. So yes, they're unsettled. They can't fathom how you walk with a confidence that doesn't sway, how you face life without needing the crowd, how your courage endures when theirs collapses. But that's the difference. Borrowed courage fades when the lights go out. Yours was born in the dark, and that's why it lasts. Number 13. You don't hide because you know your light doesn't belong to you alone. You don't hide because you know your light doesn't belong to you alone. That's the part people often misunderstand. They think your visibility is about pride, ego, or wanting attention, when in reality it has nothing to do with that. You understand that what you carry, your strength, your wisdom, your resilience, your truth, isn't just for you. It's for others who need to see that survival is possible, that courage is real, and that authenticity still exists in a world full of masks. Hiding would mean burying a gift that was never meant to stay locked inside you. What unsettles people is that your presence exposes their assumptions. They see you standing in the open and think you're trying to prove something. But the truth is, you're not seeking validation. You're operating from purpose. That purpose requires you to be visible, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it attracts opposition, even when people misinterpret your motives. You've accepted that your light isn't meant to stay hidden, because light has no purpose if it isn't shining. This is why your visibility feels so disruptive. It's not performance, it's service. Every time you step forward, you unknowingly give permission for others to do the same. You become living proof that it's possible to survive fire and still shine. And that influence isn't about fame or recognition, it's about responsibility. You know what it feels like to be in the dark, to think there's no way out, to feel like no one could possibly understand. That's why you refuse to disappear now, because someone else is watching, and your presence gives them hope. People who don't understand this mistake it for arrogance. They assume your confidence comes from ego. But real confidence doesn't boast. It carries weight quietly. You're not showing up to draw attention. You're showing up because your calling demands it. The difference is profound. One is about being seen for self. The other is about being seen for the sake of others. So, no, you don't hide because you recognize that your light isn't yours to keep. It was entrusted to you, not as decoration, but as direction. And every time you choose visibility, you remind the world that purpose shines brighter than pride, and that presence, when rooted in service, is never about ego. It's about responsibility. Number 14. Your visibility reminds them of their own invisibility. Your visibility reminds them of their own invisibility. That's the real sting behind their shock. It isn't just that you show up, it's what your showing up exposes. When you stand in your truth, unapologetically visible, it casts a light on how much they've been hiding. Hiding behind personas, hiding behind excuses, hiding behind masks they've worn for so long they can't even tell where the mask ends and they begin. You didn't just step into the light, you revealed their shadows. This is why your presence feels confrontational to them, even when you're not trying to confront anyone. You're not pointing fingers. You're not making accusations, yet your very existence in plain sight forces them to see what they've avoided. They see you living without disguise, and it makes their carefully constructed identities look flimsy in comparison. It's not your words that trouble them. It's your authenticity. Because every time you show up as yourself, you silently ask the question they've been avoiding. Why are you still hiding? The truth is, most people are more comfortable in invisibility than they admit. They shrink themselves to fit expectations, to avoid criticism, to feel safe in the shadows. They've convinced themselves that hiding is survival. But when you walk out into visibility, it unsettles that logic. It proves that life in the open is possible, that freedom is possible, and that their hiding isn't protection. It's a prison. That realization hurts because it forces them to confront the gap between the life they settled for and the life they could have chosen. Your visibility is disruptive because it carries a mirror. They see in you the courage they never cultivated, the risks they never took, the truth they never embraced. And instead of celebrating it, many react with discomfort, even hostility, because it forces them to feel the weight of their own compromises. That's why they whisper, why they question, why they project. It isn't really about you. It's about the parts of themselves they buried. You are proof that it's possible to live without hiding, and that terrifies them because it dismantles the excuses they've lived by. In the end, your visibility isn't just about you being seen, it's about them realizing how invisible they've made themselves, and that truth is something they can't ignore. The shock people feel when you refuse to hide isn't really about you at all. It's about what your visibility exposes in them. You've shown that scars can be worn without shame, that courage doesn't need a crowd, and that presence itself can be a weapon of truth. You shattered the roles they scripted for you and stood tall in the very places they expected you to disappear, and in doing so, you proved something undeniable. Visibility is not vanity, it's victory. Every time you show up, you cancel lies, dismantle narratives, and remind people that survival is possible without disguise. Your courage unsettles them because it isn't borrowed, your strength unsettles them because it isn't performed, and your presence unsettles them because it highlights their absence. You don't stand in the light to boast, you stand there because your story, your resilience, and your truth were never meant to be hidden. So let them be shocked. Let them wrestle with what your presence reveals. Because the very fact that you are still here, visible and unshaken, is proof that darkness didn't win. And that, chosen one, is the kind of revelation no shadow can bury. Family, if this message spoke to you, don't just keep it to yourself. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and drop a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs the reminder that they don't have to hide either. Your support keeps this truth moving and makes sure more people step into their light. God bless you.